Devin Kane stood frozen as the principal read out loud the test score. A perfect 100, then looked up and sneered. "There's no way you did this on your own." In a room full of students, no one spoke, but everyone heard the accusation behind the smile. They called it protocol. He knew it was profiling, and just as they prepared to fail him publicly, Devin reached into his backpack and pulled out something that would change everything. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun hung low over Lockridge University's granite buildings, casting long, crisp shadows across the manicured campus lawn. Students in every color of hoodie and backpack buzzed through the open commons, greeting old friends, checking classroom schedules, and hustling to beat the inevitable first-day seating rush. Inside Hamilton Hall, room 27, a stately lecture theater with aging oak panels and rigid wooden seats, the energy was already electric. This was Professor Alder's classroom. It was math, but not the kind with calculators or confidence. This was advanced theoretical structures, the one class students feared, and the one where reputations were either born or buried. Devin Kane stepped in quietly. No swagger, no phone out, no headphone. Just a gray hoodie zipped all the way up, a simple backpack slung on one shoulder, and a gaze fixed straight ahead. He didn't scan for friends, didn't seem to have any. He didn't linger. Instead, he moved to the very front row and sat alone, placing a black composition notebook on the desk in front of him. No laptop, no pens, no eye contact. Around him, students muttered. A few chuckled under their breath. One boy leaned into his friend. "That's the Kane kid, right? The one from Oakland or something?" His friend shrugged. "I heard he barely said a word all last year. Like, never answers. Never talks. Ghost student." Professor Alder entered 5 minutes late, as was his tradition. Crisp navy blazer, flawless Windsor knot, leather satchel swinging from his shoulder. The room snapped to attention. He thrived on it. The silent hush when he stepped in, the unspoken worship in the air. He glanced once toward the front row and paused ever so slightly, when he saw Devin. "Ah," he said lightly, projecting with practiced command. "Seems we've got a few returning faces, and a few surprises." Some students laughed on cue. Alder had the rhythm of a man who knew how to turn subtle sarcasm into a weapon, his cruelty often so elegantly veiled in wit that it took seconds to sting. Devin didn't move. As Alder walked past rows of bright-eyed overachievers, he let his fingers brush a few laptop lids, nodding at those he remembered from last semester. He stopped midway and turned back to the board. "Let's begin with a bit of light hazing," he said with a smile. "Not the kind that gets you expelled. Just enough to separate the thinkers from the memorizers." More laughter. He began writing an equation on the board, massive and looping, symbols curling like abstract calligraphy. His back to the class, Alder spoke clearly. "This equation has baffled half the doctoral candidates I've mentored," he said. "Anyone who can solve it today gets an automatic A on their first quiz." He turned slowly. His eyes landed on Devin. "But let's make it interesting." The room quieted. "Mr. Kane," Alder said smoothly, "why don't you be our opening act?" Heads turned. Devin didn't flinch. He looked up at Alder with unreadable calm. The professor gestured theatrically toward the board. "No pressure. I'm sure the math curriculum in wherever you are from prepared you adequately." The moment stretched. A few students laughed awkwardly. Others stared, unsure if this was a joke or a test or both. Devin stood slowly. He didn't look angry, didn't show any signs of offense. He moved with slow precision to the whiteboard, still silent. Alder stepped back, arms folded. "Whenever you're ready," he said. Devin picked up the marker, uncapped it, and stared at the equation. The class waited. Then something shifted. His hand moved. Deliberate. Exact. Not hesitant. Not panicked. Each line he wrote curved with mathematical clarity, erasing and replacing Alder's approach step by step. The symbols flowed differently, forming patterns no one in the room recognized, yet felt eerily correct. A murmur rose in the back. "Wait, is he flipping the base assumption?" One student whispered. "No way. That's not how Alder teaches it." Devin kept writing. Alder's jaw tightened just slightly. The final symbol landed with a sharp stroke. Devin capped the marker and stepped back without a word. The board glowed with strange elegance, a solution unfamiliar to everyone except one man. Alder stared at it. He didn't move. For the first time in years, he didn't have a ready comeback. Behind him someone snorted, then laughed, and then a few more students joined in. This time not at Devon but at the sudden silence of the master who'd just been undone by the ghost in the front row. Devon returned to his seat, and Alder, finally regaining his voice, leaned against the podium. "Well," he said with a forced chuckle, "that's certainly a creative interpretation. I suppose that's what happens when math meets performance art." The laughter returned, this time louder, sharper, and Devon, expression unchanged, opened his composition notebook and began to write. Professor Alder makes his first cutting remark, and the class laughs. The laughter in room 27 echoed long after the class dismissed, lingering like a fog of superiority. While most students filtered out discussing the surprise brilliance of Devon's solution, others couldn't ignore the way Professor Alder had twisted the moment. He hadn't praised Devon, hadn't even acknowledged the solution's accuracy. Instead, he had dismissed it as performance art, cleverly disguising his discomfort under a veil of intellectual snobbery. Devon sat still for several minutes after the room emptied, not because he was uncertain or shaken, but because he had learned long ago that exiting too quickly after being the center of attention always led to whispers behind his back. He waited for the silence to settle, then packed his notebook and walked out. In the faculty lounge the next morning, Alder recounted the moment to his colleagues. "You should have seen him," Alder said, sipping his overpriced espresso. "This student, Kane, tried to rewrite the problem in real time, like he was the next Ramanujan. Creative? Sure. Accurate? Debatable. But let's be honest, showmanship isn't scholarship." Some professors laughed, nodding in agreement. Not because they reviewed Devon's solution, but because Alder's voice carried weight and unspoken permission. One junior lecturer, a woman named Dr. Halden, looked unconvinced. "Have you checked the math, though?" she asked quietly. Alder waved it off. "That's beside the point. It's about humility. First-year students, especially the quiet ones, often think they're smarter than the system, until the system reminds them who's in charge." That reminder would become a recurring theme. In the following weeks, Devon's silent brilliance persisted. His weekly assignments, though always handwritten in that same black and white notebook, were consistently flawless. But Alder never read them aloud during in-class reviews, never used Devon's examples as model answers like he did for others. Instead, he singled him out in small, piercing ways. During one class, Alder asked a question about function theory, and then turned toward the rows of students. "Let's see, Mr. Kane, care to help us all understand if you've figured out how a limit actually works? Or is that too remedial?" Devon answered with a calm, calculated nod, and then gave a precise explanation that silenced even the overachievers. Alder smiled, eyes crinkling. "Interesting. Not wrong. Just unconventional." Again, it became a pattern, the praise always followed by a qualifier, the compliment buried under skepticism. Students began noticing. Some, like Paige Lawson, a mixed-race engineering major, started exchanging glances with others when Devon spoke. "He doesn't talk like he's confused," she whispered one afternoon. "He talks like he's holding back." Even so, Alder persisted with his veiled jabs. "Some students," he announced once with a sly grin, "have the gift of cleverness. But cleverness without clarity can be dangerous in mathematics and in life." Devon, once again, said nothing. But the silence wasn't weakness. It was restraint. Devon had learned to read between the lines. In every school before Lockridge, teachers had underestimated him, not for lack of grades. His GPA had always been pristine, but for the audacity of being a young black student who excelled without flaunting it. One guidance counselor had once told his mother, "Devon is too quiet to be taken seriously for honors programs." Another had suggested speech therapy, despite his perfectly enunciated answers. He wasn't surprised by Alder. But he was tired. The breaking point came during the fourth week of the semester, on a rainy Wednesday morning. The lecture had been dense, filled with abstract number theory, and the students' energy was low. But Alder, as always, knew how to stage a moment. "Let's have a bit of fun," he said suddenly, setting down his chalk and turning to the class. "Pop quiz. Except this one will be collaborative. One student at the board, the rest of you shouting out suggestions." Groans followed. A few students looked down. Others exchanged amused glances, hoping not to be picked. Alder's gaze swept the room like a searchlight, then stopped. "Devon," he said, voice almost chipper, "why don't you guide us this time?" It wasn't a question. Devon closed his notebook and stood up slowly. He approached the board as if walking through shallow water. He knew, everyone did, that this wasn't a real exercise. It was a test, but not of math, of something deeper. Alder scribbled a twisted function across the whiteboard, one that intentionally contained a red herring. A trick question buried inside a solvable shell. "All right," Alder said. "Let's see if our quiet genius can teach the rest of us something." The class fell still. Devon studied the problem, marker uncapped in his hand. Seconds ticked by. Then a voice from the back, Taylor Griggs, an international student, piped up. "Split the numerator first." "No," said Devon, without turning. That would disguise the discontinuity. Another voice, Paige this time. "Are you seeing a hidden asymptote?" "Yes," Devon said, "but it's not vertical. It's behavioral." He began writing, line after line, clean and decisive. He didn't show off, didn't pause for effect, just wrote like someone who had already solved it in his mind and was now teaching his hand to catch up. Halfway through, Alder interrupted. "Interesting approach," he said, tone sharpening. "But wouldn't you say your second transformation relies on an unproven conjecture?" Devon turned, for the first time in 4 weeks, and met Alder's eyes. "No," he said quietly. "I proved it last semester in Professor Lerner's elective." A murmur ran through the room. Alder's expression faltered, just slightly. But it was enough. Enough for everyone to feel the crack in the master's armor. The students knew then. This wasn't tough love. This was something else. Devon's name is called for a surprise math challenge, in front of the entire class. The sound of chalk against the whiteboard sliced through the silence. Each stroke was deliberate, echoing with the confidence of someone who believed he was about to teach a lesson no student would forget. Professor Alder stepped back, admiring his own work, a dense web of mathematical chaos that sprawled across the board like an abstract painting. The class sat in uneasy silence, watching the theater unfold. "Now," Alder said, turning slowly toward Devon, "since our young prodigy seems to enjoy creative interpretations, perhaps he'd like to demonstrate his brilliance once again." His words were smooth, almost charming, but his eyes, sharp, glacial, amused, gave away the cruelty behind them. Devon stood beside him, the room's fluorescent light catching faintly on his skin. His notebook lay untouched on his desk, pages half filled with quiet precision, waiting for a world that didn't care to read them. The students whispered among themselves. Some were curious, some nervous. They'd seen this before, Alder's way of establishing dominance when he felt intellectually cornered. "This," Alder said, gesturing to the equation, "is not your standard derivative problem. It's a test of structure, logic, and patience. Qualities one might lack if one relies too much on intuition." His voice lingered on the last word like a blade. The implication was clear, and so were the eyes that darted between Devon's face and Alder's smirk. Devon looked at the equation. It was intentionally tangled, nested variables, asymmetric bounds, and a contradiction hidden deep within the structure. It wasn't meant to be solved. It was meant to break him. He stepped closer to the board, reading every symbol like it was a foreign language he somehow still understood. His calm unsettled Alder. "Take your time," Alder said softly. "After all, math rewards patience, even when it refuses to cooperate." A few students laughed, softly, nervously, uncertain if it was safe to join in. Devon's fingers tightened around the marker. He didn't respond. The silence stretched, long enough for Alder to start pacing, for the tension to thicken, for someone in the back to whisper, "This is cruel." Alder heard it. But learning is cruel," he said, not even turning, "and reality doesn't grant exceptions for sensitivity." Devon didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on the symbols. He began slowly erasing one section, rewriting a single variable differently. The room's energy shifted. Even the laughter stopped. Every stroke of chalk felt like a defiance. Measured, careful, intelligent. But Alder wasn't ready to lose again. He leaned on the desk, voice dripping with mock encouragement. "Be careful, Mr. Kane. Wouldn't want to embarrass yourself twice in one semester." The class froze. They could hear the venom behind the words. Not just arrogance, but something older, colder. A message. "Stay in your place." Devon paused, hand hovering midair. For a moment he thought about sitting down, about letting Alder have the moment he was desperate for. But somewhere deeper, in a memory of his mother helping him solve fractions at the kitchen table, in every teacher who'd ever mistaken his quiet for ignorance, something hardened. He kept writing. Each line came cleaner now, bolder. His handwriting curved elegantly across the board, filling the space with quiet certainty. He didn't explain what he was doing, didn't narrate or justify himself. The classroom, the laughter, the power, even Alder's authority, seemed to shrink around him. He wasn't performing. He was proving. Still, Alder couldn't allow silence to win. "Interesting," he said suddenly, stepping closer. "You seem to be rewriting my parameters. Are we just making up new math now?" Devon finally spoke, his tone low but clear. "You built the problem wrong." A stunned hush fell. Alder blinked, the faintest flicker of disbelief crossing his face. "Excuse me?" Devon turned slightly toward him, not with anger but with calm precision. "It's contradictory by design. You used a false equivalence in your setup. It can't be solved because it wasn't meant to be." Alder's face stiffened. The class stared between them. Professor and student. Authority versus truth. "You're suggesting," Alder said, voice sharp now, "that I made an error?" "No," Devon said, his tone measured, deliberate. "You made a point, just not the one you think." For a long suspended moment, no one spoke. Then Alder laughed, brittle and cold. "Well," he said, "I suppose we can't all agree on what counts as correct. But I'm sure the grading committee will appreciate your confidence." The message was clear. Defiance would cost him. Devon stared back, unflinching, but inside the tension burned, not from fear, but from recognition. He'd been here before. He knew what came next. Doubt, discredit, dismissal. The bell finally rang, and the students gathered their things quietly, whispering as they left. Some avoided eye contact with Devon. Others offered sympathetic glances they were too afraid to make public. Alder remained at the board, pretending to erase it, though his eyes followed Devon all the way out the door. As Devon stepped into the hallway, the sound of rain echoed faintly against the tall glass windows. The reflection of the board still glimmered in his mind. The unsolvable equation, the setup, the laughter that had followed. He had no proof yet, but he could feel it. This wasn't an accident. Alder wasn't testing his skill. He was testing his worth. And Devon wasn't planning to fail either test. Devon calmly picks up the chalk and starts solving. The bell rang late that morning, but no one moved. Professor Alder's final comments still echoed faintly in the minds of every student seated in room 27. Devon Kane had returned to his chair, silent as ever, while a tension lingered in the air, a feeling that something irreversible had just happened. For weeks Devon had been the quiet anomaly, barely noticed, never praised. Now, eyes followed him as though he'd just stepped out of a storm carrying lightning in his hands. The next lecture came with anticipation so thick it felt tangible. Rumors had already begun to swirl. Devon's restructured equation had been photographed, sketched, even described in late-night Reddit threads, dedicated to Lockridge University's toughest classes. And while some dismissed it as exaggerated storytelling, others whispered of something more, a mind misunderstood, and a professor exposed. Alder walked in with his usual cold grace, briefcase in hand, a tight-lipped smile resting beneath his neatly trimmed beard. But his eyes, sharp and scanning, held a new glint. Not confidence, calculation. "Let's get started," he said flatly, dropping his briefcase with a muted thud. Mathematics doesn't wait for gossip to die down. The students hushed. Devon sat in his usual seat, front row, his notebook unopened. But this time, his stillness wasn't camouflage. It was strategy. He had felt something shift after last class. It wasn't just about proving Alder wrong. It was about surviving what would come next. Alder wrote a fresh equation on the board. Unlike the last, it was clean, balanced, challenging but legitimate, the kind of problem designed to reassert his control. He turned, eyes landing on Devon. "Mr. Kane," Alder said almost softly, "would you care to walk us through this one?" It wasn't framed as a challenge. No mockery. But Devon recognized the trap. This was no longer about the equation. It was about the eyes watching, and Alder's need to own the narrative again. Devon stood slowly, walked to the board, and picked up the chalk. No one spoke. Even Paige, normally fidgeting by now, sat rigid, in her seat. He studied the problem, eyes narrowing just enough to signal focus. Then he started writing. The first steps were straightforward. Reduction, substitution, standard techniques. But as he moved into the second phase, something subtle happened. He paused, glanced at the ceiling as if visualizing the next transformation, then began rewriting the structure of the function. The chalk tapped rhythmically, calmly, methodically. Students leaned forward. The sequence was not only correct, it was innovative. Devon wasn't just solving, he was redesigning the process. A sequence of steps most students memorized. He reshaped into something fluid, intuitive, and faster. A soft gasp rose from the back row. Jamal whispered, "He's not solving it the way we learned." "No," Paige murmured. "He's solving it better." By the time Devon reached the middle of the board, Alder had gone completely still. His arms remained folded, but his fingers tapped against his sleeve with quiet tension. This wasn't just another display. This was mastery, unteachable, untrained, raw, the kind of brilliance that couldn't be molded, only feared or resented. Devon continued without hesitation. His hands were steady, his breathing even. The math unfolded like a language only he was fluent in, not because he'd read it in a textbook, but because it was part of him. Every mark seemed to anticipate the next, every transformation sharper than the last. And then came the twist. Instead of simplifying to the expected result, Devon added a second layer, another operation, more advanced than required. Something no student was expected to attempt. Alder stepped forward, voice colder now. "Mr. Kane, that last maneuver is that from the optional reading packet." Devon didn't look at him. "It's derived from it." Alder tilted his head. "Derived? You extended an unsolved hypothesis mid-solution?" Devon simply nodded. "It's provable." Alder hesitated. That wasn't the answer he wanted. He looked at the board, his lips parting slightly, as if about to argue, but the math was too tight, too clean. There were no missteps, no ambiguities. The students knew it. They felt it. Grace, seated near the side, slowly lifted her phone under the table and pressed record. Her camera captured the full board. Devon's steady hand, the tension in the air. She wasn't thinking about virality. Only proof of something happening that couldn't be ignored. Devon drew the final line and capped the chalk. He stepped back, arms by his side, and looked at no one. The board behind him glowed like a window into another realm. Alder's problem reimagined with elegant efficiency. Silence. And then, whispers. "He solved it," someone breathed. "No," said another. "He taught it." Alder stood frozen, his jaw clenched, but he forced a tight smile. "Thank you, Mr. Kane," he said flatly. "Please take your seat." Devon returned to his desk, opened his notebook, and began to write. He didn't acknowledge the eyes on him, didn't need to. His work had already spoken. And in the back row, Grace hit upload. The video, just under 3 minutes, would be shared quietly, first to a group chat, then a forum, then a larger page. No one expected what it would become. A classmate starts filming and uploads the clip to social media. Grace didn't expect anything when she uploaded the clip. In fact, she forgot about it until the next morning, when her phone buzzed non-stop. At first it was just notifications from her friends, laughing emojis, shocked reactions, frantic messages, asking, "Who is this kid?" Then the video crossed 10,000 views. By noon it hit a 1. By nightfall it was all over TikTok, Twitter, and academic Reddit. The clip was trimmed perfectly. Devon's steady hand writing on the board, the camera catching Alder's stiff posture in the background, and a perfect ending where Devon stepped back, as if unveiling a masterpiece. The caption was simple, but piercing. "Professor tried to humiliate him. Watch what happens next." Comments exploded. "He just rewrote college calculus live. Who is this kid and why isn't he teaching the class? This is the quiet kid they always underestimate." But with admiration came the other side. "Fake. No way he did that on the fly." Affirmative action strikes again. "He's probably memorized the answer. Bet he can't do it twice." By the next morning, the video crossed 1 million views. Devon's name was trending, and Lockridge University's math department found itself buried in interview requests and scrutiny. Reporters began calling the university. Some wanted to profile Devon as a genius. Others, particularly far-right YouTube commentators, used the moment to stoke controversy. Devon, however, said nothing. He walked to class the same way, wore the same hoodie, sat in the same seat. But the campus no longer ignored him. People stared. Some nodded with awe. Others more silently, with resentment. A few students approached him, eager to get a selfie, or ask if the solution was real. Alder remained composed but visibly rattled. His lectures became sharper, his tone clipped. In one session he spent 15 minutes discrediting online narratives that lack academic context. He never mentioned Devon directly, but everyone understood. Devon kept writing in his notebook. Then came the email. From the university board. A formal notice. Subject: inquiry regarding classroom conduct and academic decorum. It stated that, due to the public attention and the perception of classroom misconduct, a closed review panel would meet the following week to discuss the preservation of instructional authority and academic integrity. The message wasn't about Devon's math. It was about his visibility. In the dorm lounge, Paige read the email over Devon's shoulder. "They're not congratulating you," she said, stunned. "They're warning you." Devon stared at the screen, unreadable. "This isn't about the board," he said quietly. "It's about him."
Paige nodded. "He's not just mad you were right. He's mad the world saw it."
That night, Devon received a DM on Instagram from someone he didn't know, a stranger claiming to be a Lockridge alumnus. The message read, "You think this is the first time Alders tried to destroy someone like you?" Attached was a screenshot of an old Reddit thread, buried but still live, titled "Why I Left the Math Department," a warning for black students. The university's board schedules a closed meeting about academic decorum. The video's virality changed everything, but not in the way people expected. By the third day, national education accounts had reposted it. Influencers commented on it. Podcasters were dissecting Devon's style, his calm demeanor, even his hoodie. Yet, inside Lockridge University, the temperature shifted from awe to anxiety. Devon wasn't celebrated. He was contained. In classrooms, professors whispered cautiously about the incident in room 207. In faculty lounges, the conversation revolved less around what Devon had solved, and more around what he had disrupted. Professor Alder, known for his grip over his syllabus and the department's unspoken hierarchy, had been publicly upstaged, and worse, by someone who wasn't supposed to be exceptional. Behind closed doors, Alder painted himself as the victim. In a quiet meeting, with the Dean of Academic Standards, he leaned back in his leather chair, voice steady but weary. "This isn't about race," he said. "It's about order. A student took a non-traditional approach and that's fine, but now he's become a media figure. That attention is toxic. It compromises the authority of the classroom." The dean, Dr. Bexley, nodded slowly. "The board is worried. The press inquiries haven't stopped. Some donors are asking questions, and he's not cooperating," Alder added. "He won't speak to faculty, won't clarify what he was trying to prove. He's withdrawn, deliberately. It's making the whole department look divided." Alder's complaint was neatly packaged. No raised voice, no outright accusations, just the careful rebranding of Devon's brilliance as insubordination. He didn't accuse Devon of cheating, but he implied arrogance. He didn't claim Devon had disrupted the class, but suggested his presence unsettled the learning environment. And it worked. Soon Devon was summoned to an administrative review. Not for misconduct, but for clarification of academic engagement. The language was vague, but the intent was not. Devon sat in a sterile office across from an assistant dean who smiled too much and listened too little. "We just want to understand what you were doing," she said. It was a very unique interpretation of the assignment. "I answered the problem," Devon replied, "and corrected a flaw in its structure." She nodded. "Pen tapping." "Yes, that's what we're trying to address. This kind of interpretation, while impressive, might cause confusion among other students. Or make them feel," she paused, "inadequate." Devon blinked. "My work made other students feel inadequate?" She offered a practiced smile. "Unintentionally. It's not a blame thing. It's a visibility issue." Outside the office, students still stopped him. Some thanked him. Others asked if he would tutor them. But a few avoided his gaze entirely. One student muttered as he passed, "Show off." Paige noticed it too. "It's like they've decided you're either a genius or a threat." Devon shook his head. "It's not or. It's both." The comments online had evolved. Alongside support, there were now threads accusing Devon of being disrespectful to tenured educators, of being handed a spotlight because of his identity. Anonymous profiles mocked his speech, dissected his background, and questioned his GPA. The noise bled into reality. In the department office, Alder proposed a revision to the class structure, more rigid participation rules, stricter rubrics for solution methods. Unofficially, it was called the Devon Clause. One evening, Devon received a knock at his dorm door. It was a graduate TA from another department, a black man named Lionel, who had been following the story quietly. "You're not the first," Lionel said without introduction. "Alder did this to my friend's sophomore year. Quiet black student. Math mind like you. He got ghosted out the program." Devon stared. "What happened to him?" Transferred. Left the field. No press. No video. Just disappeared. The conversation chilled Devon more than anything the university had said. This wasn't an isolated storm. It was a cycle, and he had stepped into its eye. The next morning, Devon opened his student portal and found a formal notification marked urgent. It was a letter from the Office of Academic Conduct. Not a suspension, but close. This letter serves as a formal warning for behavior that has disrupted instructional norms, potentially impacted class cohesion, and introduced unauthorized modifications to curriculum interpretation. Further incidents may result in administrative withdrawal from course or program. Devon sat still, the words sinking into him like a weight. They hadn't praised his work. They hadn't asked him to explain. They hadn't celebrated his potential. They had labeled him dangerous for thinking too far, too fast, too openly. He printed the letter and slipped it into his notebook, the same one he had filled with equations no one asked to see. Devon receives a warning letter, threatening expulsion. The warning letter sat folded between the pages of Devon's notebook, its sharp edges pressing into his thoughts like splinters. For the first time, he didn't attend class, not out of fear, but clarity. He knew what came next. The quiet removal, the rewritten story, the erasure. He'd lived it before. Back home, in a corner of East Oakland, the world had always underestimated silence. As a child, Devon never yelled for attention, never fought for the spotlight. While others competed to be heard, he listened, not out of shyness but strategy. He noticed patterns others missed, rhythms hidden in chaos. But in school systems that prized loud answers and smiling compliance, Devon's quiet mind was often mistaken for defiance. By third grade, he had already mastered most of the math in the school's curriculum. He found mistakes in answer keys, corrected his teacher once, gently, and was sent to the hallway for interrupting. At parent-teacher conferences, his mother, Lila Kane, was told the same thing over and over. Devon is bright, but he's unmotivated, withdrawn. He doesn't participate. They never asked how he finished every assignment early, or why his notebooks were filled with equations far beyond the lesson plan. In 6th grade, Devon spent weeks trying to get into the school's gifted program. He passed the placement test with near-perfect scores, but the principal said the test didn't match his social maturity. His silence, once again, had betrayed him. That same year, a teacher accused him of plagiarism after he submitted a math project involving combinatorics, a topic never covered in class. Devon was called to the office. No one believed he'd developed the methods himself. He was forced to redo the assignment. Simpler, less suspicious. Lila fought back where she could. She met with counselors, filed complaints, but single black mothers were easy to ignore. And boys like Devon, quiet, composed, disinterested in conformity, were easier to discard than to understand. So Devon learned to shrink. He stopped finishing his assignments early. He stopped correcting mistakes. He gave just enough to pass, never enough to stand out. His notebooks filled with proofs, codes, graphs remained private. He wasn't hiding his mind. He was protecting it. By the time he reached high school, Devon's reputation had hardened into a myth. Some teachers assumed he was average. Others called him unreachable. One math teacher, Mr. Delaney, flatly told the class, "You can't teach someone who won't talk." But in the margins of tests and on the backs of worksheets, Devon continued to build. Not for grades. Not for teachers. For himself. There was only one exception. A substitute named Ms. Marin. She came during the spring of 10th grade, filling in for an overworked algebra teacher who'd gone on extended leave. From the first day, she noticed Devon, not because he raised his hand, but because his eyes never left the board. She assigned a problem set involving geometric proofs. Devon returned it the next day, rewritten, restructured, and extended by 4 pages. She asked to speak with him after class. "You rewrote the theorem." Devon didn't flinch. It was flawed. Ms. Marin studied his eyes. "You don't speak much, do you?" "No one listens much." That moment stayed with her, not just because of what he said, but how he said it. With a tiredness too old for 16, a wisdom too soft to shout. For weeks she fought to get him evaluated for advanced placement. But the school declined. "It's too late in the semester," they said. "He doesn't have the behavior profile for acceleration." When her term ended, she left with a heavy heart. Devon had returned to the background. Another genius ghosted by the system. Years passed, until one afternoon, sitting in her tiny Oakland apartment, Ms. Marin scrolled through Twitter and paused at a video with over 2 million views. The caption read, "Professor tried to humiliate him. Watch what happens next." She hit play. It was him. Taller, older, still quiet, still focused, still rewriting the rules with chalk in his hand and brilliance in his bones. Tears welled up before the video even finished. "He survived it," she whispered. "He made it through." But then she read the threads below. The backlash. The warning letter. The threats of academic review. Her awe turned to fury. Not again. Not this time. She opened her old laptop, dug through a dusty folder marked Student Projects, and found the scanned copy of Devon's rewritten geometry proof, dated and signed. She attached it to an email addressed to the Lockridge University Dean of Student Equity. The subject line was simple: "You're doing it again. Stop it." A former teacher, Ms. Marin, sees the viral video and decides to speak up. The email Ms. Marin sent to the Dean of Student Equity didn't get a response. Not at first. But 2 days later, her phone rang. "Is this Ms. Alexandra Marin?" the voice asked. "Yes. This is Joylene Travis, education correspondent with West Bay News. We saw your email. Would you be willing to talk about your former student Devon Kane?" She hesitated. Then she said the words she'd been waiting to speak for years. "Yes, but only if it's on record." Within 48 hours, the interview was scheduled. The backdrop was simple: a bookshelf, a potted plant, the air of quiet resistance. Miss Marin wore a plain sweater and minimal makeup. She didn't want to perform. She wanted the story to speak for itself. "I taught Devon in 10th grade, she began, eyes steady. "He was the most brilliant student I'd ever seen, not just in that school, in my entire career. But brilliance means nothing when the system has already made up its mind about you." The interviewer leaned in. "What do you mean?" "I mean, the school didn't want him. Not really. He was too quiet, too smart, too black, and he didn't play the game, didn't raise his hand, didn't smile at the right time, didn't beg for approval. He just knew, and they hated him for it." She placed a stack of old documents on the table, scanned assignments, hand-marked tests, and that same rewritten geometric proof from years ago. "They buried him," she said softly. "And now I see the same thing happening at Lockridge." The clip was cut down to 7 minutes and released online the next morning. It wasn't loud. It didn't scream, but its honesty hit like a drumbeat. The title? "He was always brilliant. We just didn't listen." It exploded. Within hours, Devon Kane's name trended again. But this time, not as the mysterious student at the chalkboard, but as a boy who had been ignored for a decade. The interview was shared by activists, educators, celebrities. Teachers commented, "We've all had a Devon, and we failed them." But within Lockridge's walls, the story played differently. At a faculty meeting that morning, Professor Alder sat tight-lipped, jaw clenched as a projector played the clip before a room of colleagues. One professor, Dr. Halden, crossed her arms. "This doesn't look good." Alder shook his head. "It's emotional manipulation. She's not an expert. She's a former sub with a grudge." "Maybe," another professor said, "but she's saying what people are already thinking." The room quieted. No one defended him. Outside campus, students gathered in clusters, watching the video on their phones. Devon walked by slowly, avoiding eye contact, the tension in his chest rising with every glance, every whisper. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was a symbol, and symbols weren't allowed to make mistakes. That evening, Paige found him alone in the study hall. "She did it," she said, sitting beside him. "She told the world what they wouldn't listen to before." Devon nodded, quiet. "It's not gonna stop the hearing." "No," she said, "but it changes the stakes." He looked down at the warning letter again, now creased and faded. He had expected to face the board alone, but now for the first time, the narrative was shifting. Ms. Marin didn't stop with the interview. She wrote an op-ed. It ran in 3 local papers and was picked up nationally within a day. She detailed the pattern of institutional neglect Devon faced, the schools that dismissed his silence as disengagement, the counselors who pushed him away from STEM, the rooms where his name was never spoken with belief, only suspicion. She ended the piece with a line that would be quoted across the country. "We keep asking why black students don't shine in math, but we never ask how many times we've dimmed the lights." The night before the disciplinary hearing, the segment aired on national news, footage of Devon at the board. Snippets of Miss Marin's voice, calm, clear, devastating. Paige watched it in her dorm with a small group of students. Some cried. Others sat frozen. One said, "I had no idea." And Devon? He watched alone, the volume low, the screen flickering in the dark. When it ended, he closed his laptop, stood up slowly, and folded the letter one last time. Tomorrow, they would try to erase him again. But now the world was watching. Her interview airs the night before Devon's disciplinary hearing. The tribunal room smelled of cold air and old paper. Everything inside Lockridge University's Academic Conduct Committee chamber was designed to feel neutral: beige walls, matching chairs, no windows, no distractions. But neutrality, Devon had long learned, was a costume. And behind it, institutions always picked a side. 3 faculty members sat at the head of the table, a student affairs officer at their flank. The 5th chair, left empty, belonged to the dean, who would enter only at the time of verdict. A recording device sat in the center of the table, its red light blinking, a reminder that this hearing would be documented, but not shared. Devon sat alone. No advocate. No legal support. The university had told him he could request a representative, but no one explained how. And by the time he asked, the deadline had passed. Across the table, Professor Alder sat with perfect posture. A folder in front of him, his expression unreadable. He didn't gloat. He didn't glare. He simply waited, the same way a surgeon waits for the anesthesia to kick in.
Mr. Kane, began Dr. Bexley, the chair of the committee.
This is not a disciplinary hearing in the traditional sense. It's a review of instructional conflict. Our goal is to determine whether your conduct in Professor Alder's classroom has compromised the academic environment. Devon nodded once. No reaction. We've reviewed footage, spoken with faculty, and considered statements from your peers. The concern is not your capability, which is evident, but your methodology, your refusal to follow structured participation norms, and the disruption your work has caused, both online and on campus. Devon kept his hands folded in his lap. Calm. But inside something pulsed. "You're suggesting my silence is disruptive?" he asked. Dr. Bexley cleared her throat. "We're saying the visibility surrounding you has impacted classroom cohesion."
You mean it made people uncomfortable?
Another faculty member shifted in his seat. "There's a perception that you're positioning yourself outside the pedagogical process, that you're challenging instruction without dialogue. That creates a barrier for both your instructor and your peers." Devon let the words sit in the air. Challenging instruction without dialogue. The sin of thinking too hard, too fast, too far beyond the comfort of the room. Alder finally spoke. "This isn't about ability," he said smoothly. "I've had brilliant students before. This is about respect. Mr. Kane refuses to engage within the structure of the classroom. He disrupts without contributing. He performs, but he doesn't participate." Devon looked at him. Not with anger, not with fear, just clarity. "I participated the only way I was allowed," he said. "I showed my work. I answered when called. I kept my head down. That wasn't enough because it wasn't obedience." The room fell quiet. The committee glanced at one another. Then Dr. Bexley picked up a small file and opened it. "We've also received a letter of concern," she said, "from a donor affiliated with the university's STEM endowment. They expressed reservations about the reputational impact of last week's media attention." Devon blinked. They weren't even pretending anymore. This wasn't about math. It was about control. His silence had been interpreted as arrogance, his genius as rebellion, his visibility as threat. "Mr. Kane," said another member, softer now, "this can be resolved. We're not trying to expel you. But we need to know that you'll adjust your behavior, that you'll work within the instructional framework, moving forward." Devon took a breath. "I'll adjust," he said slowly. "When the framework stops assuming I don't belong." The words hung like glass, suspended midair. The room froze. Even Alder's hand tightened slightly around his pen. The committee leaned back, nodding quietly. Unreadable. Dr. Bexley tapped her folder shut. "We'll take a brief recess before delivering the final decision," she said. Devon stayed seated, while the panel exited the room. Alder stood, adjusted his tie, and walked toward the door. Before he left, he paused beside Devon. "You're clever," he said, almost too softly to hear. "But cleverness burns out fast when you make too many enemies." Devon didn't respond. He didn't need to. The door shut behind Alder. He sat alone for 5 minutes. Then 10. Then footsteps returned. The door creaked open. But it wasn't the committee. It was someone else. A woman, mid-30s, with a lanyard and a thick folder in hand. She stepped forward. "Sorry to interrupt," she said. "My name is Lorraine Harris. I'm a civil rights attorney. Mr. Kane's former teacher asked me to be here. Devon stared, stunned. She smiled, just barely. You didn't have to fight this alone. Just as the verdict is about to be read, a surprise witness walks in. The room shifted the moment Lorraine Harris introduced herself. Her presence alone altered the balance. No longer a lone student versus an institution, but a confrontation laced with history, law, and consequences. Devon sat straighter, silent still, but the tension in his shoulders softened. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't alone. The committee returned a few minutes later, surprised to see her standing beside him. I wasn't informed legal counsel would be present, Dr. Bexley said cautiously. I'm not here in an official legal capacity, Lorraine replied smoothly. I'm here as a witness to pattern, not procedure. I have documentation and statements from previous Lockridge students regarding Professor Alder's conduct. She placed a folder on the table. Thick, organized, damning. Inside were testimonies, anonymous and signed, from over a dozen students. Some were black, others Latino, one indigenous. All had taken classes with Alder, and all described a chillingly similar experience. Being dismissed, belittled, downmarked for lack of participation, and in one case, being told during office hours, "You're not cut out for theory, you people do better with application." Gasps broke from the committee members. Dr. Bexley opened the folder slowly. "Where did you get these?" "From former students," Lorraine said, locking eyes with Alder, ones who never felt safe speaking while they were here. But Devon's story gave them permission. Devon sat frozen. He hadn't known, hadn't asked for this. Lorraine continued, "Two of the students recorded their interactions with Professor Alder. I've included transcriptions. You'll find moments where he questions their intelligence, their motives, and in one recording, their place on this campus." Alder's face drained of color. "This is slander," he muttered. "These are fabrications." "They're not," Lorraine said coolly. "They're evidence." A hush fell. Then from the hallway, a new voice called out. "May I speak?" Heads turned. A young woman stepped into the room, maybe 25, dressed in professional clothes that didn't hide the nerves trembling in her hands. Her name was Jasmine Rowe, a former student, who had graduated 3 years prior. She had driven overnight to be there. "I took Professor Alder's class my sophomore year," she said. "I was told I wasn't cut out for pure mathematics. I believed him. I changed majors the next semester. I'm here to say I regret it, and to confirm that everything in that folder is true." The room shattered into whispers. Alder didn't look at her. He kept his gaze fixed on the table, silent, seething. Devon turned slightly, absorbing it all. Jasmine's voice, Lorraine's strength, the weight of years behind him finally finding air. The committee sat in stunned silence. For minutes, no one moved. Then Dr. Bexley stood. "We'll recess again to review this new evidence," she said, her voice unsteady. "Mr. Kane, you are not required to remain." Devon and Lorraine exited the room quietly. Outside, Jasmine offered him a soft, uncertain smile. "I'm sorry it had to be you," she said, "but I'm glad you didn't back down." Devon nodded, overwhelmed, unsure if the moment was triumph or just survival. Down the hall, someone else was watching. A junior journalist for Lockridge's student paper had arrived late. She hadn't been allowed into the hearing. It was closed, but she'd kept her phone recording just outside the door. She had caught voices, statements, emotion. Enough. She uploaded it anonymously. The clip wasn't polished. The audio was muffled. But it was real. By nightfall, it had been shared by student unions, civil rights groups, and alumni networks. The world no longer had to wonder what happened behind the tribunal's doors. They could hear it. A journalist leaks the entire tribunal's footage online. The audio from the tribunal wasn't supposed to exist, let alone circulate. But by sunrise, it was everywhere. The clip wasn't sharp. It wasn't edited. It didn't need to be. What it had was Devon's calm voice defending his right to learn. Lorraine Harris delivering pages of student testimonies. Jasmine Rowe revealing how a single professor's prejudice changed her entire future. And finally, Professor Alder's silence, heavy, uncomfortable, damning. The internet didn't just watch. It listened. Closely. Justice for Devon began trending by noon. Within hours, major outlets picked up the story. CNN ran a segment called Silence Misread, the genius they tried to erase. MSNBC followed with a panel discussion on systemic racism in higher education. Social media became a storm of reposts. reactions, and rallying cries. Devon Kane, once invisible, had become the face of something bigger than himself. At Lockridge, things moved fast, and not by choice. The university released a vague statement late that evening. We are reviewing the concerns raised by students, alumni, and the broader academic community. Lockridge University remains committed to equity and academic excellence. But students weren't buying it. Neither were faculty. That same day, a group of tenured professors published an open letter supporting Devon and demanding a review of Alder's record. Faculty meetings turned tense. Students began organizing protests. Flyers went up. Listen to the quiet ones. Silence isn't submission. Black minds matter. Local news trucks parked outside campus gates. Devon's name appeared on talk shows. Civil rights leaders mentioned him in speeches. Some called him a prodigy. Others called him a symbol. Devon hated both words. Paige stood in the quad, passing out hand-printed leaflets. They're not trying to protect learning, she told a crowd. They're protecting a legacy built on exclusion. Inside his dorm, Devon watched it all unfold from behind his laptop screen. The notifications came non-stop. Interviews, invitations, support, even apologies from former classmates who had once laughed along with Alder's jokes. But Devon didn't feel victorious. He felt exposed. He hadn't asked to be a symbol. He just wanted to solve problems. Then came the twist. An email. No subject line. No greeting. Just a simple sentence. We've been watching you. We'd like to talk. He almost deleted it, assuming it was spam. But a quick search stopped him cold. ARC, the Applied Research Consortium. A private tech institute so exclusive, most people doubted it existed. Part think tank, part innovation lab. ARC was rumored to recruit outside the academic mainstream, often bypassing Ivy League filters to find minds that didn't fit the mold. He replied with a single word: listening. Within an hour, a video call was scheduled. The interface was sleek, the call anonymous. A pixelated avatar appeared on screen. A digitally disguised voice spoke. Devon Kane. You don't need another headline. Or another institution that doesn't understand you. You need space. Freedom. Challenge. We offer that. Devon said nothing. We don't care about degrees. We care about thinking. You've already passed the test we didn't know we needed to give. He leaned forward. Why me? Because you solved a structural problem using intuition, not memorization. You redefined method, not just outcome. That's rare. What do you want me to do? The voice paused. Anything you want. We'll fund your research, your curriculum, your time. Devon blinked. There's a catch. There's a condition, the voice admitted. You'll work with others, not professors. Other outliers. People like you. Devon didn't reply. He closed his laptop gently and stared at the empty notebook on his desk. His name wasn't just a headline anymore. It was an opening. But the offer raised more questions than answers. What did they really want from him? And why now? He looked around his dorm. The plain walls, the sterile desk, the institutional air he had tried so hard to breathe in like he belonged. This place had never been designed for someone like him. It had tolerated him until it couldn't anymore. And now, just as it prepared to push him out, the world had cracked open a new path. His phone buzzed again. A text from Paige. You see the news, CNN wants to talk to you. Tonight. He didn't answer. Not yet. Outside, students marched with signs. Faculty members signed petitions. The board scrambled for damage control. And Devon, for the first time, realized something bigger than himself. They could try to silence him. But they couldn't mute the movement he'd started. An elite tech institute contacts Devon with a mysterious offer. The world had changed. But Devon Kane still moved quietly through it. In the days following the leak of the tribunal audio, and the storm of public backlash, Lockridge University became a campus in crisis. Every hallway buzzed with tension. Faculty members whispered in corners. Students walked more boldly, carrying signs, wearing shirts printed with Devon's image beneath the words, "Think loud, even when you're silent." But Devon avoided the noise. He stayed off social media. He turned down 3 interview requests, and ignored a dozen speaking offers. He declined a panel invite from an Ivy League dean who wanted to highlight diverse excellence. Devon didn't want to be a case study. He didn't want to be paraded. He wanted peace. But peace, like brilliance, was a luxury not often given freely, especially not to people like him. One afternoon, a letter arrived under his dorm door, hand-delivered. No return address. No university stamp. Inside was a formal offer on heavy, off-white stationery, stamped with the silver seal of the Archie Institute. It was brief. Devon Kane, we recognize what others missed. You are invited to join the Applied Research Consortium as a fellow in residence, effective immediately. Full housing, stipend, and creative autonomy provided. Your voice, your pace, your work. No lectures, no grades, just problems worth solving. Let us know if you're ready.
ERC Selection Committee.
He stared at the paper for a long time. Paid, respected, unrestricted. It sounded perfect, but nothing had felt perfect for weeks. That night, Devon stood by his window, watching the lights flicker across campus. In the courtyard below, students chanted his name. A chant he had never asked for. A movement born not from his ambition, but from his humiliation. He closed the blinds. His phone buzzed. A message from Paige. You're leaving, right? IRC, that's the dream. He typed, deleted, typed again, finally sent, maybe. But it doesn't feel like my dream, because it didn't. ARC offered everything he should have wanted. A way out, a platform. But for Devon, the goal had never been spotlight. It had always been understanding, solving, building. The moment the world began clapping was the same moment it started watching him like a product, not a person. He paced his room for hours. Every celebration felt heavier now. Fame had cost him trust, quiet, privacy. It had made his silence louder than ever. And it hadn't fixed anything. Alders still had tenure. The university still hadn't issued an apology. And other students like him still sat in the backs of rooms, trying not to be seen too soon. When morning came, Devon made a decision. He emailed ARC, but he added a condition. I will accept the fellowship under one requirement. I design and lead a free, virtual program for underrepresented high school students in mathematics. I name the curriculum. I choose the team. Non-negotiable. He hit send, and didn't wait for their reply. By noon, I responded. Agreed. Let us know when you're ready to begin. The story made headlines again, but this time it wasn't about a viral video, a tribunal, or a scandal. It was about a boy who'd refused to be erased. Devon packed his room in silence. Alone, as always. He left behind no posters, no notes, just a chalkboard that someone had slid into his room 2 weeks earlier. A gift from a classmate. On it he scribbled a final message before walking out. Some systems are meant to be solved. Others are meant to be replaced. He stepped onto the train platform with a single bag, and his notebook, the one filled with years of misunderstood equations and lonely revelations. This time, they were going somewhere they could finally breathe. The R facility was unlike anything he expected. Hidden in the hills outside Seattle, it was less a lab and more a sanctuary. Open spaces, whiteboards that stretched across entire walls, floors lined with collaborative pods, engineers, mathematicians, physicists, all under 30, all outside traditional academia, all brilliant in wildly different ways. They didn't ask him for ID. They didn't ask for credentials. They just gave him a workspace and said, show us what you see that we don't.
He did.
Within 3 weeks, Devon published a digital proof that cut existing algorithmic load times by 37%. Another resident, a neurocoding specialist from Atlanta, read it and said, this is insane. We've been stuck on this for months. Devon shrugged. It just made sense. And slowly, he began to feel like he belonged, not because people clapped when he spoke, but because they listened when he didn't. But even as the fellowship settled into routine, Devon never forgot what brought him there. At night he drafted the curriculum he'd promised, a 10-week virtual math program for Black and brown high schoolers, focused on creative problem solving, not memorization. It had no grades, no lectures, just exploration. The title was handwritten across the first page, The Unseen Mind, Finding Power in Quiet Genius. He recruited guest mentors, not professors, but coders, data artists, young engineers from working-class backgrounds, people who knew what it meant to be doubted before being seen. Paige joined as a program advisor. Jasmine Rowe signed on as a mentor. The first cohort enrolled within days of the announcement. 92 students from 12 states. Some homeschooled, some in underfunded schools, some with straight A's, others with none at all. They shared one thing. They had all been told, at some point, that they weren't math people. Devon greeted them on the first day through a live stream. He didn't speak long, just enough. "I don't need you to prove anything," he said. "I just need you to remember that your mind belongs to you, even when the world acts like it doesn't." By the third week, the program was trending nationally. The New York Times ran a headline, "From Target to Teacher, the math mind they nearly missed." But Devon didn't read the articles. He was too busy watching the students solve things he had once been punished for understanding. He no longer solved alone. He led. He agrees. Under one shocking condition. Months passed. What began as a virtual outreach program for high schoolers soon grew beyond Devon's control. The first 92 students turned into hundreds. Parents emailed. Teachers requested materials. Students from South Carolina to South Dakota sent handwritten notes that said things like, "I never felt smart until this." And through it all, Devon remained grounded. Not out of humility, but necessity. He knew how fast institutions could twist narratives. He had lived it. So instead of expanding fast, he moved carefully. It was Paige who planted the idea. "You should build a university course," she said one evening on a call. "Something real. Something that forces them to shift." Devon paused. "They'll never approve that." "Then don't ask them. Propose it." 2 weeks later, with RSA's backing and a small coalition of Lockridge faculty allies, Devon drafted a pilot course. Its title was direct, bold, and untraditional. Mathematical Freedom. Deconstructing Structures of Exclusion. The description read like a manifesto. A study in the historical suppression of underrepresented minds in mathematics, and the reimagining of mathematical frameworks through creative, inclusive theory. No textbooks, no grades, just process, problem, and perspective. Lockridge's academic council debated the proposal for weeks. Some called it transformative. Others called it dangerously informal. Professor Alder abstained from voting. But in a narrow 4-3 decision, the course was approved for a one-semester trial. Devon would teach it. And he wasn't alone. He recruited guest instructors Jasmine, now pursuing a master's in educational equity, Lorraine Harris, offering a legal lens, and AR2 staffers with backgrounds in computational theory, who agreed to participate anonymously. The classroom was designed differently. Desks in a circle, whiteboards on every wall. No rows, no podium. Everyone wrote. Everyone contributed. On the first day, Devon entered 10 minutes early. He stood in the center, surrounded by silence, waiting. One by one, students trickled in, and then they kept coming. By the hour's start, every seat was filled. The waitlist had doubled. Administrators were stunned. But Devon didn't smile. He didn't perform. He wrote one word on the board. Permission. Then turned around. "We were never supposed to have it," he said. "So let's stop waiting for it." The class nodded. Some slowly, some with tears in their eyes. Over the next few weeks, students tackled unsolved problems, reframed classical theory, and built equations off lived experience. Devon didn't lecture. He guided. He asked. He let silence breathe, the very thing he'd once been punished for. The media covered the course lightly. Local outlets praised it. National ones dismissed it as experimental. But the students knew better. Inside that room, math became language, liberation, power. Then, midway through the semester, Devon opened the next round of enrollment rosters. He scanned the names. Most he recognized. One stopped him cold. Alder, Thomas D. He stared at it for a full minute. At first he thought it was a prank. Then the registrar confirmed it. Professor Alder had enrolled in the course. As a student. No faculty privilege. No override. Full registration. The man who had once humiliated him was now officially under his instruction. Devon closed his laptop slowly. Whatever came next, this was no longer just about redemption. It was reckoning. Enrollment surpasses records, but one name stands out on the roster. Alder. The day Professor Thomas Alder walked into Devon Kane's classroom, silence fell like a dropped pin. Some students gasped. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances. Devon didn't look up right away. He was writing on the board, listing out a series of unsolved problems in statistical theory. It was a normal morning. Until it wasn't. Alder took a seat at the far end of the circle. Second row. No fanfare. No laptop. Just a single black notebook. The same kind he used to mock Devon for preferring. At first, no one believed it was real. But then the official memo leaked. As part of Lockridge's internal restitution efforts and under pressure from several faculty oversight boards, Professor Alder had been strongly advised to participate in professional development initiatives that addressed pedagogical bias and classroom equity. He had chosen to enroll in Devon's course. Some said it was a PR move. Others thought it was a final power play, an attempt to regain narrative control from inside the very thing that dethroned him. Devon thought nothing of it. At least, that's what he told himself. But when Alder sat down and pulled out his notebook, Devon's chest tightened. He remembered what it felt like to be on the other side of that stare. Sharp, judging, designed to make you shrink. Now the roles had reversed. But Devon refused to weaponize that shift. He welcomed the class as usual, acknowledging every student, including Alder, with the same nod. He never made a comment, never called on him specifically, never stooped to the bait of revenge. Instead, he taught. And Alder, for all his pride, listened. In the early weeks, he never spoke, just scribbled furiously in his notebook, glancing around at the circle of students, many of whom had once sat in his own classes. Students who now questioned the very structures he spent years upholding. One afternoon during a group project, a student named Carmen nervously turned toward Alder and asked, "Do you want to work with us?" Alder paused, then nodded. "If you'll have me." The moment rippled. Not forgiveness, but a shift. That week, Devon began assigning readings from Black mathematicians, indigenous frameworks of spatial logic, and overlooked contributions by women of color in early computational theory. Alder read every word. One day, he stayed after class. "You're reframing the architecture," he said quietly. "Not just the curriculum." Devon didn't look up. "That was always the point." Alder nodded once. "I see that now." It wasn't an apology, but it was more than silence. The class carried on. Students debated freely, created collaboratively, and began submitting original solutions to research journals. A group project from Devon's class was published in a peer-reviewed journal, under the title Reimagining Rigor, Equity-Driven Problem Design in Undergraduate Mathematics. Alder's name was not on it, but he cited it weeks later during a conference panel. Slowly, and without permission, he began speaking differently. He no longer used phrases like meritocracy. He no longer taught with intimidation. He even rewrote his own syllabus to include inclusive theory models, something unthinkable the year before. But none of that erased what had happened. And Devon knew it. He also knew that some wounds didn't need revenge to matter, just memory. On the final day of class, Devon entered the room as always. But this time, a stage had been set. Literally. The university had chosen to turn the last session into a public forum, a gesture of acknowledgement. Though some called it performance. Students, faculty, and even members of the media were allowed to attend. Devon was scheduled to give a short lecture titled Process Over Permission, Teaching Beyond the Grade. He stood center stage in a gray shirt, sleeves rolled, eyes steady. "This course wasn't about math," he began. "It was about what math reveals, about power, perception, and the people we push to the margins." The audience leaned in. He scanned the crowd. His voice never rose, but his presence filled the space. "I was told once that silence made me a problem, that quiet meant I didn't belong. But silence isn't absence. It's analysis, and sometimes it's survival." Applause. Not loud, but real. Then Devon paused. He glanced down at a small note he had folded in his pocket. He unfolded it slowly, eyes scanning the ink he'd written the night before. Finally, he looked up. "There's one more thing," he said. He turned toward the audience but locked eyes with Alder. "This semester," he said, "someone enrolled in this course not because they had to, but because the world changed around them. That takes something most people never find. Not just humility, but listening." Alder blinked. Devon continued. "I want to say thank you." Gasps. Whispers. Alder shifted in his seat. "Not for the past," Devon said, clarifying, "but for showing up, for staying, for not walking out when the power changed hands." Then he stepped back. Mic dropped. The room erupted, not into cheers, but into a hush, a shared understanding. This wasn't a victory speech. It was a release. Devon ends the semester with an unexpected message for Alder, on stage. By the time the semester ended, Devon Kane's name was no longer just tied to a scandal or a viral moment. It was tied to a movement. Within weeks of his final lecture, universities across the country began reviewing their curriculum frameworks. Articles appeared in the Chronicle of Higher Education and Inside Higher Ed, questioning the gatekeeping of rigor and how it had been weaponized for decades to silence non-traditional voices. A growing number of institutions launched internal audits of racial bias in STEM departments. Some departments issued open apologies for overlooked students. One Ivy League university invited Devon to consult on restructuring its introductory math sequence, a symbolic reversal for a system that once labeled him a disruption. But Devon said no to most interviews. He gave one speech at an education summit in Atlanta, where he stood in front of hundreds of administrators and said simply, "You don't need more diversity statements. You need to stop punishing brilliance that doesn't sound like yours." His words were quoted across national platforms, but Devon didn't linger in the spotlight. He went back to IARC, went back to designing, teaching, solving. The second round of his Unseen Mind program expanded globally. Applications poured in from as far as Kenya, the Philippines, and Brazil. It was translated into 3 languages, but Devon kept the mission simple: reach those who'd been told they didn't belong. He gave them tools, and more importantly, permission. Still, something felt unfinished. Late one evening, while clearing out an old Dropbox folder, Devon found a photo, a scanned image of a 6th grade math worksheet, covered in red ink. A big X crossed out a complex proof he'd written in the margins. Next to it, a teacher had scribbled, "This isn't part of the assignment. Please stick to the instructions." Devon stared at it for a long time. It wasn't anger that rose. It was clarity. That moment, the one where he first learned that thinking too far ahead came with punishment, had been the seed of everything that followed. He closed the laptop, opened a drawer, pulled out a piece of paper, and wrote a short letter. 2 days later, he stood outside his old middle school, Roosevelt Middle, in Oakland. It looked smaller now, worn down, familiar in the way that scars are familiar. He carried a box of chalk and a sealed envelope. Inside, the letter read, "To the next Devon, you may feel like you don't fit, like your silence makes them nervous, like your questions are too much. You're not the problem. The system is. So I'm giving you this chalk, not because I want you to teach, but because I want you to draw your own path. Rewrite the rules, break the frame, flip the problem. They tried to mute you. I hope this helps you stay loud, even in your silence. DC." He handed the box and letter to the front office, addressed simply, "For the student who never raises their hand." As he walked back down the hallway, the same hallway where he'd once been sent out for over-participation in silence, he paused. The math room door was open. Inside, a young black student sat alone during lunch, sketching something on a scratch paper, shapes and lines that made little sense to anyone else. Devon didn't interrupt. He just nodded once through the door. The student looked up and smiled. Devon visits his old middle school, with a box of chalk and a plan. If you've ever been judged before you had a chance to speak, if you've seen brilliance get buried just because it didn't come from the right skin, then you know this story isn't just Devon's. It's happening everywhere.